I never expected that a simple request from a neighbor would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Before that day, my world was a small, predictable loop contained within the four walls of my apartment. It was a life I had curated for safety, for quiet, and for the kind of loneliness that eventually feels like a familiar blanket. But then Caleb happened, and the blanket started to feel more like a cage. My name is Miles. I'm a freelance illustrator, which is a polite way of saying I spend most of my days in my pajamas, talking to my cat, and drawing things for people I've never met. My apartment was my sanctuary. It overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street, and the afternoon light that spilled onto my drafting table was the most consistent relationship I had. The building itself was old, with thick walls that mostly muffled the lives of my neighbors into a vague, ignorable hum. It was peaceful. It was routine. And then the hum changed. A moving truck grumbled outside one Saturday, and a new sound was added to the building's quiet symphony. The energetic, slightly chaotic noise of someone building a new life. That someone was Caleb. He moved into 3B, directly across the hall from me. I first saw him wrestling a ridiculously oversized armchair through the doorway, his muscles straining against the fabric of his t-shirt. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sawdust in his hair. He looked like the kind of man who built things with his hands, who knew how to fix a leaky faucet or change a tire without watching a video tutorial first. From my peephole, which I became intimately acquainted with over the next few weeks, I pieced together a portrait of him. He was a carpenter, I guessed, from the scent of fresh-cut wood that sometimes clung to the hallway and the work boots he left by his door. He had a dog, a huge, goofy golden retriever named Buster who seemed to be made entirely of boundless joy and shedding fur. Caleb would talk to him in a low, affectionate rumble as they left for their morning walks, a sound that vibrated through my own front door and settled somewhere deep in my chest. He seemed confident, easygoing, and so completely out of my league that it was almost comical. I'd hear him on the phone sometimes, his laughter echoing in the hall, and I'd invent a whole life for him. A life with a pretty girlfriend, a group of boisterous friends, and weekends spent hiking or at some lively brewery. He was a bright, warm sun, and I was a quiet satellite, content to observe his orbit from a safe, unbridgeable distance. We exchanged the occasional tight-lipped nod when our paths crossed, the kind of polite, meaningless acknowledgement city dwellers perfect. I was just the quiet guy in 3A. He was the handsome neighbor I drew in the margins of my sketchbooks. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build walls, and then admire the view of what's on the other side. My routine was unshakable. Wake up, make coffee, work, break for lunch, work some more, make dinner, watch something, sleep. It was a cycle of comfortable solitude. The only interruptions were deadlines and the occasional need to venture out for groceries. I had convinced myself I was content. Loneliness was just the price of admission for a life without the risk of complication or heartbreak. I was safe in my carefully constructed world. That safety shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, hesitant knock on my door. It wasn't the sharp rap of a delivery person or the tentative tap of a canvasser. This was different. I padded over to the door, my heart doing a strange little flutter, and peered through the peephole. My breath caught. It was Caleb. He was leaning against the doorframe, his face pale and etched with a combination of pain and deep embarrassment. His left arm was in a makeshift sling, and he was putting very little weight on his right foot. I opened the door, my professional, neighborly mask firmly in place. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes, a surprising shade of hazel flecked with green, met mine. They looked tired. "Hey," he started, his voice a little strained. "Sorry to bother you. This is, kind of a weird question." He shifted his weight and winced, a sharp intake of breath that made me want to reach out and steady him. "I had a bit of an accident at work. Stupid fall off a stepladder. Sprained my wrist and my ankle pretty good." He gestured vaguely with his good hand. "The doctor said to stay off it for a few days. And well," he trailed off, looking past me into my apartment as if searching for the right words. From inside his apartment, I heard a low whine, followed by the thud of a tail hitting the floor. "Buster." Caleb's shoulders slumped a little. "Here's the thing. I can't really walk Buster. And he's a lot of dog. My friend who usually helps out is out of town, and I don't know anyone else in the building." He finally looked back at me, his gaze direct and pleading. The confident, self-assured man I had watched from afar was gone, replaced by someone vulnerable and in need of help. It was disarming. I was wondering, and please feel free to say no, but would you be willing to walk him for me? Just for a couple of days, until my friend gets back. I'll pay you, of course. My mind raced. This was an intrusion, a disruption to the routine. It was everything I normally avoided. But looking at him, standing there so clearly in pain and so humbled by having to ask, I found the word no simply wasn't available. A yes would mean crossing a threshold, stepping out of my orbit and into his. It was terrifying, and it was the only thing I wanted to do. Don't be ridiculous, I heard myself say, the words sounding braver than I felt. Of course, don't worry about paying me. It's what neighbors are for, right? A wave of relief washed over his face, so potent it was almost tangible. Seriously? Oh man, thank you. You're a lifesaver. Miles, he knew my name. I was momentarily stunned. Of course he knew my name. It was on the mailbox. But hearing him say it sent a ridiculous jolt through me. It made me feel seen. For the first time, I wasn't just the quiet guy in 3A. I was Miles, and I was about to walk his dog. The first walk with Buster was an education. Caleb had not been exaggerating when he said he was a lot of dog. He was a 70-pound fur missile of pure, unadulterated enthusiasm for smells, squirrels, and every single person we passed. He pulled, he sniffed, he tried to make friends with a grumpy-looking pug. It was chaos. It was exhausting. And as I wrestled with the leash, laughing as Buster tried to lick my face off, I felt a crack appear in the placid surface of my life. When I brought a tired, happy Buster back to Caleb's apartment, Caleb insisted I come in for a minute. Let me at least get you a water or something, he said, hobbling towards his kitchen. I stepped inside, and my preconceived notions about him crumbled to dust. I had expected a Spartan, masculine space, a leather couch, a giant television, maybe a few sports posters. The reality was so much more interesting. His apartment was filled with light and life. Yes, there was a big, comfortable-looking couch, but it was covered in a soft, woven blanket. The walls weren't bare. They were adorned with intricate, framed sketches of buildings, bridges, and fantastical structures that looked like they belonged in a storybook. On a large workbench in the corner, surrounded by tools, sat a half-finished project, a beautifully carved wooden box, its surface covered in interlocking leaves and vines. It was exquisite. You drew these? I asked, walking over to a series of charcoal drawings of old city architecture. Caleb nodded, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Yeah, it's just a hobby. Something to do. I ran my fingers lightly over the frame of one. They're incredible, Caleb. This isn't a hobby. It's a talent. His eyes softened. He looked down at his bandaged wrist with a flicker of frustration. Well, a talent that's on hold for now. In that moment, he wasn't the unattainable, confident handyman from my imagination. He was an artist, just like me. He was someone with a passion that had been temporarily taken from him. We talked for a while, perched on his sofa while Buster snored at our feet. He told me about his dream of shifting from carpentry to custom furniture design, of creating pieces that were both functional and beautiful. I told him about my work, about the children's book I was currently illustrating. The conversation was easy, flowing between us without the awkwardness I usually felt with new people. We discovered a shared love for old fantasy novels and a mutual disdain for cilantro. It was strange. I felt like I'd known him for years, not just as the guy across the hall I'd been secretly observing for weeks. I was seeing the real person, the one hidden behind the superficial image I had created. And he was so much better than anything I could have imagined. Later that evening, after the second walk of the day, I brought Buster back. Caleb had ordered pizza and insisted I stay and share it with him. We ate sitting on his living room floor, using the coffee table as our table. Buster lay between us, occasionally lifting his head for a hopeful sniff. It was so domestic, so comfortable, that it almost scared me. This was the kind of simple, shared moment I had told myself I didn't need. As I was helping him clean up, which mostly consisted of me putting the pizza box into the recycling bin, my hand brushed against his as I reached for a napkin. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But a spark, undeniable and bright, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I glanced at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was looking at our hands, then up at me, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, the air in the room grew thick and heavy, charged with a question neither of us was brave enough to ask. He cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell. Thanks again, Miles. For everything, but the moment lingered. It was a small thing, a touch that lasted less than a second, but it had shifted something between us. It was no longer just about helping a neighbor. A new layer of awareness had settled over our interactions, a quiet hum of possibility that was both thrilling and terrifying. When I went back to my own apartment that night, the silence felt different. It no longer felt peaceful. It just felt empty. The next 2 days fell into a new, tentative rhythm. Morning, noon, and evening, I would knock on Caleb's door, collect an ecstatic buster, and we'd venture out into the world. My own work was forgotten, my deadlines pushed to the back of my mind. My world, once confined to my apartment, had expanded to include the park, the tree-lined streets, and the quiet, art-filled space of apartment 3B. Each time I returned, Caleb and I would talk. The conversations grew longer, more personal. He told me about his family in a small town upstate, about the pressure he felt to follow in his father's more practical construction footsteps. I found myself opening up in ways I rarely did, sharing stories about my own solitary childhood, about how drawing had become my first and most loyal friend. He was an incredible listener, his hazel eyes focused on me, making me feel as though what I was saying truly mattered. The vulnerability he'd shown on that first day had not disappeared. It was woven into him, a soft thread running through the strong fabric of his personality. I saw it in the way he talked about his art, a mix of pride and insecurity. I saw it in his frustration with his own body, his impatience to heal and get back to the work he loved. This was the Caleb I was coming to know, a man of surprising depth and quiet sensitivity, hidden just beneath a surface of easygoing confidence. The initial hope that had sparked within me was now a steady, growing flame. But with it came a familiar companion, anxiety. I was constantly replaying our interactions, dissecting every word, every look. That brief touch of our hands became a landmark in my memory, a moment I returned to again and again. Did he feel it too? Was I just projecting my own longing onto his simple kindness? The fear of rejection, of misreading everything and making a fool of myself, was a cold knot in my stomach. On the third day, the turning point arrived. It was late afternoon, and a gray, persistent rain had been falling since noon. I brought Buster back, both of us soaked and smelling of wet dog and damp earth. Caleb was in the living room, looking restless and agitated. He'd been cooped up for days, and it was clearly getting to him. "I feel so gross," he muttered, running his good hand through his damp, tangled hair. "I haven't been able to wash my hair properly since the fall. I tried this morning in the sink, and I think I got more water on the floor than on my head." He let out a sigh of pure frustration. "It's so stupid, but it's driving me crazy." An idea, wild and reckless, bloomed in my mind. My mouth went dry. I could help you," I offered, my voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air between us. The suggestion was so intimate, so far beyond the bounds of casual neighborly help, that I immediately wanted to take it back. I was sure he would laugh or look at me like I was insane. But he didn't. He just looked at me, a long, searching look. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by that same raw vulnerability I'd seen at my door. "You would do that?" he asked, his voice quiet. I just nodded, unable to speak. The air crackled with unspoken things. This was a line, and we were both consciously deciding to cross it. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay." The bathroom was small and steamy. Caleb sat on the edge of the tub, wearing a pair of gym shorts, his back to me. I knelt on the bath mat beside him, my knees protesting against the hard tile. My hands were shaking as I adjusted the shower head, aiming the warm spray so it would hit his head without drenching his sling or the rest of him. The sound of the water filled the small space, a rushing white noise that seemed to amplify the frantic beating of my own heart. "Ready?" I asked. He gave a small nod. I squeezed a dollop of shampoo into my palm, the clean, herbal scent filling my senses. Taking a deep breath, I plunged my hands into his hair. It was thick and soft, so much softer than I had imagined. My fingers worked the lather through the strands, gently scrubbing his scalp. He leaned into my touch, his whole body seeming to relax with a quiet sigh. His head was bowed, a posture of complete trust, of utter surrender. My world narrowed to that single, focused act. The feeling of his hair between my fingers, the warmth of the water, the quiet sound of his breathing. I was hyper-aware of his proximity, of the bare skin of his shoulders just inches from my hands, of the steam rising around us like a curtain, separating us from the rest of the world. This wasn't just washing someone's hair. It was an act of care so profound, so deeply intimate. It felt more revealing than if we had been naked. I rinsed the shampoo out, my fingers tracing the shape of his skull, lingering perhaps a little longer than necessary. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing down. When I was done, I turned off the water, and the sudden silence was deafening. I gently squeezed the excess water from his hair with a towel, my movements slow and deliberate. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, he slowly turned his head to look at me. His hair was slicked back, his face glistening with moisture. His hazel eyes were dark, intense, and they were looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, but it made my stomach flip. It was a look that held gratitude, but also something deeper, something questioning and raw. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. In the quiet, steamy sanctuary of his bathroom, the dynamic between us had been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The hours that followed were thick with a new kind of silence. The easy camaraderie we had built was gone, replaced by a charged, palpable tension. We avoided looking directly at each other, our conversations shrinking back to polite, functional exchanges. Do you need anything? No. I'm good. Okay. See you later. It was as if the intimacy of the bathroom had been too much, a bright light that had sent us both scurrying back into the shadows of our own uncertainty. I went back to my apartment, but I couldn't settle. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of replays and analysis. I sat on my sofa, staring at nothing, while the scene in the bathroom played on a loop in my head. The feel of his hair, the sound of his sigh, the look in his eyes afterward. Every detail was magnified, scrutinized for hidden meaning. What did that look mean? Was it just gratitude for an act of kindness? Or was it the same potent mix of fear and desire that was churning inside of me? This became my obsession for the next 24 hours. My internal monologue was a frantic debate between hope and self-preservation. One part of me, the hopeful, romantic part, was convinced that the moment had been as significant for him as it was for me. That the trust he had shown, the vulnerability he had allowed, was a clear signal of something deeper. That touch, that look, it had to mean something, right? People don't just let their neighbors wash their hair without it being more. But the other part of me, the cautious, cynical part that had built the walls around my life in the first place, was screaming that I was a fool. It told me I was projecting my own loneliness, my own desperate crush, onto a simple, practical situation. He was injured. He needed help. I was available. That's all it was. He was a kind, straight guy, and I was the helpful gay neighbor who was reading way too much into everything. To him, it was probably just an awkward but necessary task. The thought made my stomach clench with a familiar, sickening dread. I was setting myself up for a fall, a humiliation that would be so much worse than the quiet ache of my usual solitude. The next day, the tension was even worse. I took Buster for his walk, and when I returned him, Caleb was on the phone. Yeah, Dave, that would be great. Tomorrow morning? Perfect. Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver. He hung up and turned to me, a strained smile on his face. That was my friend. He's back in town. He can take over with Buster starting tomorrow. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was over. The reason for our forced proximity, the excuse for my presence in his life, was gone. My role was ending. This was it. I had to retreat back to my side of the hall, back to my quiet, safe, empty life, now haunted by the memory of what I had briefly felt in his. Oh, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. That's great. I'm glad you'll have some help. Yeah, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck with his good hand, a nervous gesture I'd come to recognize. So, I guess this is the last time. Then Buster, oblivious, nudged my hand with his wet nose. I gave him one last scratch behind the ears. I guess so, I said, my throat feeling tight. Well, if you need anything else, just, I started to back out of his doorway, desperate to escape before I did something stupid, like let him see the crushing disappointment on my face. I needed to get back to my apartment, to the safety of my own space where I could fall apart in private. I had to rebuild the walls that had been so thoroughly dismantled over the past few days. I turned to leave, my hand on the cool metal of my own doorknob, the few feet of hallway carpet between us feeling like a vast, uncrossable canyon. It was done. I had been a fool. Miles, his voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the fog of my retreat. I stopped, my back still to him, unable to turn around. I couldn't bear to see the pity or polite gratitude on his face. I just waited, bracing myself for the final, friendly goodbye. I heard him take a hesitant step out into the hallway, the soft scuff of his good foot on the carpet. The air grew still. And then he was there, right behind me. I could feel the warmth of his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of the shampoo I had used on his hair the day before. He lingered in my hallway, a silent presence that made every nerve in my body stand on end. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I still couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, his hand closed around my wrist. The touch was firm, not aggressive, but definite. It sent a shockwave straight to my core. Gently, he tugged me closer, turning me around to face him. My hand fell away from my doorknob. We were standing in the dim, neutral territory of the hallway, caught between our two separate worlds. His eyes, no longer unreadable, were wide and filled with a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He was still holding my wrist, his thumb stroking softly over my pulse point. "Please, just wait." I stared at him, my mind completely blank. The careful narratives of hope and fear I had constructed were gone, erased by the reality of his touch, of his presence. He took a shaky breath, his gaze locked on mine. "My friend Dave," he began, his voice low and earnest. I could have called him 3 days ago. He wasn't out of town. I mean, he was, but he came back the day after I got hurt. The confession hung in the air, a stunning, brilliant revelation. I just stared, trying to process what he was saying. I told him I had it handled. Caleb continued, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. I lied. I lied because I didn't want him to come. I wanted you to. My breath hitched. The entire foundation of my anxiety, the belief that I was just a convenient helper, crumbled away. "Why?" I managed to choke out, the word barely audible. His grip on my wrist tightened just a fraction, as if to anchor himself. "Because I've been trying to work up the nerve to talk to you since the day I moved in, Miles," he confessed, his voice cracking slightly. "I'd see you coming and going, so quiet and focused. I saw you through your window sometimes, at your drafting table. I wanted to know you. And I'm a coward. This," he gestured between us with his head, "the accident, needing help, it was just an excuse. A stupid, clumsy excuse to get you to talk to me." A wave of dizzying, overwhelming relief washed over me. The knot of fear in my stomach didn't just loosen. It dissolved completely, replaced by a warmth that spread through my entire body. He wasn't just being kind. He wasn't just grateful. He felt it too. He had felt it all along. "I'm the coward, Caleb," I said, finding my voice at last. I was so sure I was making it all up in my head. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, transforming him. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "So that moment with my hair?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for confirmation. I nodded, a laugh bubbling up from my chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yeah," I breathed. "That was definitely a moment." He released my wrist, only to bring both of his hands up to cup my face. His good hand was warm and solid against my cheek, while the bandaged one rested gently against my jaw. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned in to meet him, and then he kissed me. It wasn't like the fleeting touch of our hands or the charged intimacy of the bathroom. This was sure. It was confident and mutual, a question and an answer all at once. It was the feeling of coming home to a place I hadn't even known I was searching for. When we finally broke apart, we just stood there in the hallway, resting our foreheads against each other, laughing softly. The barrier between apartment 3A and 3B was gone for good. In the weeks that followed, the hallway between our apartments became less of a divider and more of a bridge. My door was often left ajar, and so was his. My quiet, solitary routine was joyfully dismantled and rebuilt into something new, something shared. My mornings now started not just with coffee, but with the sound of Buster's happy whining as Caleb brought him over for a good morning greeting. We went on dates. Real dates. We went to a small Italian restaurant he loved, we walked through the art museum downtown, and we spent a whole Saturday at a sprawling flea market searching for forgotten treasures. I watched him, now fully healed, haggling good-naturedly over an old wooden chair he planned to restore. He came into my apartment and looked at my illustrations, not with polite interest, but with the genuine admiration of a fellow artist. He touched the pages of my sketchbook with a reverence that made my heart ache in the best possible way. Our lives began to merge in small, meaningful ways. A toothbrush of mine appeared in his bathroom. A favorite hoodie of his ended up draped over my desk chair. We cooked dinner together, navigating his kitchen in a comfortable dance, Buster weaving around our legs in hopes of a dropped piece of chicken. We spent evenings on his couch, my head on his chest, his fingers tangled in my hair, talking about everything and nothing until we fell asleep. The loneliness I had worn like a second skin was gone, replaced by a profound and steady sense of connection. A few months later, we were sitting on my sofa, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, just as it always had. But now, it wasn't just illuminating my drafting table. It was catching the gold in Caleb's hair as he sketched in a notebook, Buster snoring peacefully on the rug at his feet. The scene was so perfectly, wonderfully domestic that it felt like a dream. He paused his drawing and reached over, taking my hand in his. His thumb stroked over my wrist, right on the spot where he had first grabbed me in the hallway. It was a familiar gesture now, a quiet reassurance that had become our unspoken language. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I smiled, leaning my head on his shoulder. Just how a sprained ankle can be the best thing that ever happened to a person. He laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the quiet room. Yeah, well, it was a small price to pay. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. And in that quiet moment, I understood something fundamental. Life isn't about building walls to keep the world out. It's about having the courage to open the door when an opportunity, disguised as an inconvenience, comes knocking. You can spend your whole life in a safe, quiet room, admiring the world from a distance. Or you can take a chance, step into the hallway, and let someone pull you closer. I am so glad I let him pull me closer.